high crotch, bring it back, single leg. Sweet. Let me teach you how to wrestle. Okay. Let me teach you how to wrestle.
Mindset Monday is brought to you by our official sponsors, Eat Clean, bro. Make sure you order today, get them delivered right to your house, check them out, and make sure you put in your discount code MINDSET. Japanese wrestling dominance at the 2024 Olympics in Paris. Man, unbelievable. In fact, beating two of our big favorites, Spencer Lee and Kyle Dake. Unbelievable. So the Japanese returned with 8 gold medals from Paris. Crazy. 13 wrestlers participated, 11 medals, 8 gold medals. U.S., no gold medals in freestyle, which is crazy. I mean, we knew the Japanese dominance in women's wrestling. Obviously, Japanese wrestling has been great for a very long time now. We're getting a lot of messages, and we're seeing a lot of posts up in the wrestling world on social media. What are the Japanese doing? Why are they so good? How do they cultivate their athletes? What is their mindset? What does their training look like? Well, I got you covered. I've been learning about the Japanese for years now, so just to give you a little bit of a background, in order to understand what the Japanese are doing, we have to understand the history. So back when I was in 8th grade, I started getting coached, 8th, 9th grade, I started getting coached by Gerard Perez and Don Ernst. Now, Don Ernst is both of our coaches. Don Ernst was basically Flow Wrestling before Flow Wrestling ever existed. He was the USA scouting coach for Team USA, scouting technician, so a United States wrestling coach from the 1975 Worlds, 1976 Olympics, 77 Worlds, 78 Worlds, 79 Worlds. When it comes to the Olympics, him and ABC. They were the only ones with rights to this now, to the Olympic Games. Don passed away 2 years ago. May he rest in peace. But Don always spoke about the Soviets and the Japanese. I mean, he spoke about the Americans, of course, too. But he said back when he was coaching Team USA, they wanted him to film United States. But then when everyone's back was turned, he turned the camera over to the Japanese and to the Russians. And in fact, he wrote a little book, pamphlet, talking about the 70s, the golden age of wrestling. And I remember hearing about these guys' names from when I was really young, the Japanese, Kudo, Takada, Date, Tamiyama, Sugawara. I mean, these guys were common names that we were hearing when I was growing up. I watched these people wrestle, and Don really liked how they had a wide stance, probably from that sumo influence. And of course, different body types are different from around the world, so a little bit lower of the center of gravity. They were able to be very nimble and fast, even in a very wide stance. But what were they doing, right? And in fact, I'll show one other picture here. We got Don also included in his book, Ichiro Hata, who is the father of Japanese wrestling. We're going to talk about him a little bit. And what do you notice here? You have Date right here, Olympic champ, looking at Yutaki, his coach. And what do you notice? Look at his eyes. Notice the eyes. He has his undivided attention. And one of the great things about Japanese and these Asian cultures, they're unbelievable students. They're disciplined. They take their time. They're methodical. They're conscientious. And it says it all right there. You just look at the eyes. He has his undivided attention. I want to have your undivided attention right now to talk about the history of Japanese wrestling. Okay, so, like I said, a lot of people don't know the background. And what you have to do to understand the background, you have to know the history of Japanese wrestling. Where did it all come from? Okay, so go all the way back. I mean, throwing it way back to around the 13th century, the feudal age in Japan, where the shogun came into the government. The shogun and the samurai, the samurai were, martial artists. And I did a class, actually, at the University of Pennsylvania of sentences and samurais. And, the figure that the samurai cuts may very well be seen as writerly and a great wrestler. So the samurai, they learned a lot of martial arts in Japan back in the 13th century. And some of it was swordsmanship. Some of it was hand-to-hand combat. And that hand-to-hand combat became jujutsu, or judo, which was formalized in the 16th century. So around the 16th century, they started having actual schools teaching jujutsu, or judo. But then as time went on, there arose Jiguro Kano, who is the founder of judo, of Kodokan Judo, back in the late 19th century. And with him, he was, he's basically the one, he took all these different techniques from these different judo schools, and he brought them all together, and he said, okay, what's the common philosophy? What do they all have in common? So from there, that's when we're able to start seeing, okay, this is what they all have in common, and this is an overriding philosophy, underlying philosophy of the whole thing. So that basically is efficient use of mind and body. We'll get to it. So one of the great things I did when I was on YouTube, I looked at the page Kama Jiu-Jitsu. I study. I wouldn't say I study jiu-jitsu, but I've learned a lot about the history and about different techniques. So Kama Jiu-Jitsu did a great video called "The History of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Explained." Where did the Gracie family learn it? The school time. Okay, so you watch that video. We can throw a link in the show notes, but he basically breaks it down, showing that Jiguro Kano, the founder of judo, he taught Tomita. And Tomita was one of the 4 guardians of the Kodokan, named by Jiguro Kano himself. Now, Tomita taught Maeda, and Maeda, he was a prize fighter, and he went outside of Japan, and he taught Carlos Gracie Sr. judo, or jujutsu. And basically, the Brazilians called it jujitsu. So they started saying it different, and Maeda basically got kicked out of Japan. He basically got excommunicated. So Carlos Gracie Sr., of course, teaches this art to Elio Gracie, who is the father, of course, Hickson, Hoyce, all those guys, and the uncle of a lot of them too. So that became Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So the origins of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is from judo, and again, going up the ladder from Jiu-Jitsu and the samurai, all the way back, right, when they were being trained hand-to-hand combat. So, interestingly enough, if you look at the history, why do I go into judo? Well, because it's the background of Japanese wrestling. So the same kind of timeline could be made if you look at Japanese wrestling. So you had Jiguro Kano, and one of his students, or one of his secretary, his right-hand man, actually, was Ichiro Hata, the man in the picture right here that we had that I showed before. He is considered the father of Japanese wrestling. And in fact, I just had his son, Tadaaki Hatta, who is USA Wrestling Hall of Famer. He coached the Olympic team for the U.S., for Japan, for Mexico. So again, as a coach and as a wrestler, he's an NCAA champ himself back at Oklahoma State. Him along with his brother Masaki Hatta, and I had a son Ben Hatta also on the show, who is an EIWA champ from the University of Pennsylvania, and very close friends of Yoshi Nakamura, who is connected to those guys all the way back in the St. Ed's days. So you look at the very top. You have Jiguro Kano, who taught, his secretary was Ichiro Hata. Ichiro Hata went to the United States in 1929 to teach, to spread judo, basically to show how it's done, put on exhibitions, and an ambassador of goodwill between nations. And basically, his judo guys mixed it up with some of the wrestlers in America, and they learned from each other. So Ichiro Hata brought American wrestling back to Japan, and this became the first Japanese wrestling federation, and it got put in the university. Let me get these names. I want to make sure I have these names right. It's in the book here. I'm going to show you some cool stuff. I don't have it. Where is it here? Watambi University. So over there, they had the first Japanese wrestling program, Japanese Federation. So again, then Japan, so Jiguro Kano actually told, and this is what Tadaaki Hatta told me on the podcast we did last week. He was speaking about it, and he said, basically, Kano said it would take about 50 or 60 years for Japan to get really big at wrestling, because this is in 1932, Japan brought their first wrestling team to the Olympics, including Ichiro Hata, and it was a judo team, and they wrestled. They didn't have any wins. But basically, by the 1950s, Japan had Olympic champs, so they did it in a very short amount of time, and I think that has a lot to do with their philosophy, which is what we're gonna talk about here. What's the philosophies of Japanese wrestling? So you look at it in the 1950s, 1960s, Oklahoma State. So Myron Roderick, who is the coach of Oklahoma State, was also an ambassador of goodwill, wanted to spread wrestling around the world, dialogue between nations. So there was a foreign exchange program between Oklahoma State and Japan, and they brought in Utaki, who is one of the guys that, along with Tadaaki Hatta, along with Masaki Hatta. But Utaki, if you go back to him, let's see if I have the book here. Yeah, so in Bobby Douglas's biography, The Life and Legacy of an American Wrestling Legend, Bobby Douglas talks about training with Utaki when he was at Oklahoma State. And let me get you his words right here so you could see what he said. Oklahoma State had an exchange program with Japan, and Douglas learned numerous Japanese wrestlers. Their drill system was the most disciplined of any wrestling system I ever observed, Douglas said. Their technical level of wrestling was way ahead of its time. Now remember, this is in the 1960s. They just got wrestling there 30 years ago. They would drill one technique for an hour. I thought they were crazy spending so much time on one technique until I saw them using that technique to win Olympic Games. And then Bobby Douglas says openly, one day in practice, Utaki, who is his drill partner, executed more than 200 single leg shots from his feet without stopping. I thought I was in good shape, but I got tired after doing 20 single leg shots. The guy was a machine, an absolute machine. And then this is a quote now from Bobby Douglas, who coached Cale Sanderson and Zeke Jones. Utaki is the greatest wrestler I've ever seen. He had a technical level that was unmatched. He had remarkable speed that was indescribable, and he had mental toughness where he would never break. I wrestled 7 Olympic champions and 10 world champions, but Utaki was clearly the best I've ever seen. So the influence on American wrestling is there, whether we know it, like it, or believe it, that Bobby Douglas, of course, training with Utaki, all the guys that Bobby Douglas coached at Iowa State, then all the guys that Cale Sanderson coached, because he learned from Bobby Douglas, and all the guys that Zeke Jones coached, one of my coaches, and Zeke, and Ernie Gillum was one of the coaches of Zeke Jones, and he was longtime friends with Bobby Douglas, God rest his soul as well. These guys all have that Japanese influence, and it works both ways. It's not they got it all from the Japanese and nothing from America. No. A lot of American wrestling had an influence on Japan, and of course, Japanese wrestling had an influence on America. But like I said, it all goes back, if you trace it back, to Jiguro Kano and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Japanese wrestling. So the most deadly martial art, like the greatest martial art in the world in terms of submission fight, UFC. Everyone's got to know Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So between that and Japanese wrestling, which just dominated the 2024 worlds, they have their original father in Jiguro Kano, the founder of Kodokan Judo, who brought it all together. Now, what made him so great? So I have 2 books of Kano. One is Mind Over Muscle, which of course I love that title, because wrestling mindset. It's true. He really looks at the mind over the body. And you have Kodokan Judo by Jiguro Kano. So I was tearing through these books to find out what's their philosophy, what's their mindset. So when you go through, like I said, I think this title really summarizes it well. Mind Over Muscle. And you're going to see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to read you a few excerpts from the book. I know we normally don't do some reading, but I think it's worth it for you to see that this is straight from the horse's mouth. This is where it all came from. Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Japanese wrestling. Because remember, for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Kano taught Tomita. Tomita taught Carlos Maeda, Maeda. Maeda taught Carlos Gracie Sr. Carlos Gracie Sr. taught Elio Gracie, the father of all the Gracies. And of course, you have Jiguro Kano up top, teaches Ichiro Hata. Ichiro Hata brings wrestling from America into Japan, starts the first Japanese University and Wrestling Federation. So it all comes from this judo background. All right, so let's talk about it. So judo is looked at as physical education. So Jiguro Kano says the aim is physical education. I concluded its aim is making the body strong, useful, and healthy while building character through mental and moral discipline. The way in which a person trains their body falls into 2 general categories: sports and gymnastics. For physical education to be truly effective, it must be based on the principle, and here it is. For physical education to be truly effective, it must be based on the principle of efficient use of mental and physical energy. Mental and physical energy. So he's saying how both of these are important. Now let's go on. He talks about the importance of training the mind. So you have to have the right mindset, the right approach to the sport. He says, another tenet is to apply just the right amount of force. Never too much, never too little. So what are they talking about really right there? They're talking about efficiency. And efficiency, you see that in all the Japanese products, right? I mean, their cars are just, they're durable. They last forever. Like my dad had his Toyota forever. The Hyundai keeps wearing the Honda. They're just very efficient use, like I said, of what they do. So he goes on to say, an opponent who is frantic in his desire to win. We occasionally come up against an opponent who's frantic in his desire to win. We're trained not to resist directly with force, but to play with the opponent until his fury and power are exhausted, then attack. So basically, they're using tactics, and if they feel like they're outmatched, they use those tactics to counterbalance the fact that they're overpowered, maybe, or even outmatched in a certain way, technically or physically. So let's move on. 5 basic principles of judo, which again is the foundation of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Japanese wrestling. So listen up. First is the maxim which says that one should pay close attention to the relationship between self and the other, the opponent's weight, build, strong points, temperament, and so on, and his surroundings. Second point has to do with taking the lead. Make a move that will entice the other player to move in a certain way. Third, consider fully, act decisively. The first phase is closely related to the first point above. That is, a man should meticulously evaluate his adversary before executing a technique. To act decisively means to do so without hesitation and without second thought. When a predetermined point has been reached, it's time to cease applying the technique or whatever. The fifth and final point evokes the very essence of judo. It is contained in the saying, walk a single path, becoming neither cocky with victory nor broken with defeat, without forgetting caution when all is quiet or becoming frightened when danger threatens. So it says, implicit here is the admonition that if we let ourselves be carried away by success, defeat will inevitably follow victory. It also means that one should always be prepared for a contest, even the moment after scoring a victory. Whether a person's surroundings are calm or turbulent, he should always exploit whatever means are at hand to accomplish his purpose. The student of judo should bear these 5 principles in mind. Applied in the workplace, the school, the political world, or any other area of society, he will find great benefit. Whatever the objective, it's best attained by the maximum efficient use of mind and body for that purpose. So you see, one of the big points he had there was not getting caught up in victory or defeat, and to never get cocky, never get too high, never get too low. So to be balanced. And a lot of times I feel like in America, we have this tendency to get too high or too low. Or we get either really hard on ourselves or, we get too high when we win, and we have to have that balanced approach. Now, I'm not saying the best American wrestlers don't have that. Of course they do. But again, this is the foundation of Japanese wrestling. Okay, so the next thing I tabbed off here in the book, and there's a lot of things. They're very big on footwork. If you notice, again, this is the judo book. You see different pieces of footwork over here. And why is that? The footwork is very important for how you're going to move your opponent. So judo, just like wrestling, you have to move your opponent. So as far as moving and turning, so sure, they have their gi on. This is judo. But the foot placement is very important. How much time do we spend on where our feet are going to be? And next, if you see, the one thing you notice about these books, this is scientific. It's math. There's math in these books. They have angles, if you could see. They have different things here. So what does it say? The principle of dynamics. Best results are ensured by making use of the opponent's strength. On your part, composure rather than mere strength is important to keep muscles and joints from stiffening, so they want to stay loose. Especially in emergencies, body strength should be conserved and applied in the correct moment. A person, and then it goes on, a person is balanced as long as the vertical gravitational line passes through the middle of the base formed by the legs and hips. When it does not, he is off balance and can be brought down with moderate effort. So he talks about the principle of kazushi. So in kazushi, let me go into this because you're going to see now in Japanese wrestling, but in the wrestling books how it's similar. To use strength most efficiently, it's vital to break the opponent's balance. So think about that, breaking the opponent's balance. In line with this principle of dynamics, he is then vulnerable and can be brought down with the minimum effort. Breaking an opponent's balance is called kazushi. With reference to the basic natural posture, it is 8 forms, as illustrated here. The basis of kazushi is pushing and pulling, which are done with the whole body, not just the arms. And I remember seeing Cale Sanderson talk about this. And remember, Kale's coach is Bobby Douglas. Bobby Douglas worked with Utaki from Japan. And Kale spoke about when you pull a guy, when you rotate, you need to rotate him with your entire body. He was at Rod Van Ness's Rod's Rhino. He was at his camp last year. It was last year, 2 years ago, and he spoke about rotating him with your whole body. Okay, so it says Kazushi can be done in either straight or curved lines and in every direction. Learning all basic forms and then using them in combination is indispensable to fundamental judo techniques. So you say, okay, what does that have to do with wrestling? That's judo, Gene. You talked a lot about judo. Well, like I said, you have to have understanding of their philosophy. Mind over muscle, efficiency, never getting too high or too low. Consistency all the way through. The time is now to take your mindset to the next level with Wrestling Mindset. Make sure you go to our website, wrestlingmindset.com, and sign up for your free trial session today. Don't wait any longer. You want the mental edge right now. When you sign up for the free trial session, you're also going to get a copy of our free ebook, Building the Predator Mindset. This book has helped thousands of people build confidence, relax under pressure, get motivated, and build mental toughness in wrestling, school, and life. Make sure you sign up for your free trial session today. Okay. So again, and you have the basic principle to make the most efficient use of mental and physical energy. And notice he said making use of mental energy is first. Mental is first for these people. Okay. So back to wrestling. Like I said, I had Ichiro Hata's son, Tadaaki Hatta, on the show. Now this is his wrestling book. Now my coach, before we actually spoke, Tadaaki Hatta actually was, he signed my book. Gene's Natty Wrestling Mind. Stay strong. Best wishes in wrestling, Tadaaki Hatta. So he signed this back in 2021. If you see, I have tabs all over this. This is before the Olympics, by the way. So Japanese wrestling and judo and just jiu-jitsu, this is nothing new to me. It's something we've been studying for a while. And I'd also go on to say that if you look at the back of the book, it was recommended by John Smith, Oklahoma State. Remember the Oklahoma State connection with Japanese wrestling? And also you have Date from Japan, who I said before, 76 Olympic champ. He said, Date said, this is the best wrestling textbook ever published. Like I said, Tadaaki Hatta, Ichiro Hata's son. And what do you know? And what do you notice here in his book? So there he is, the man, the myth, the legend, Ichiro Hata. Talks about the history. Again, here he talks about the history. Wrestling was a method of offense and defense used long before wrestling. Effective weapons were used. Wrestling skills were used to train warriors when they were not actually participating in combat. Okay, now let's go on. So now here he goes on. This is what I like. He goes on. So let's start with the technique in the back. It says, the goal remains that achieving a controlling force against an opponent. So how many times are we really thinking about wrestling in terms of mathematics, physics, and biomechanics? But the Japanese are, and so are the Russians, which is why they were able to rise really high, really fast. The goal remains that of achieving a control force against our opponent. A force that must be applied in such a way as to achieve maximum leverage in order to unbalance an opponent while still maintaining one's own balance. Okay, the opposing struggle of one's individual center of gravity over another. So what he's saying is wrestling is basically a battle of your center of gravity over your opponent's. How many times have you heard that? A wrestler must maintain his own center of gravity and either take over, destroy his opponent's center of gravity by either take over or destroy his opponent's center of gravity by leverage. So that's the way to win wrestling. You either need to maintain your center of gravity, destroy your opponent's, or take over your opponent's center of gravity, right? So let's go on to this. Moving forward. The other thing he shows okay, so we'll pause to put this book on hold for a second. I'll show you. So again, when I spoke in our interview to Tadaaki Hatta, it was great. He recommended 2 books for Japanese wrestling, as did his son, Ben Hatta, and they both said this. These are the 2 books. Olympic champ wrote this back in 1960, and this is 1968. This is Shozo Sasahara, and these are the master texts for Japanese. Fundamentals of Scientific Wrestling and Scientific Approach to Wrestling over here. So now these are the 2 master texts that the Japanese were working off of. Again, an Olympic champ, 1956 Olympics. Let me get you some of the points here from this book, because this really, and you're going to see the commonalities now with judo. Again, there he is again, Ichiro Hata. All right, we're going over here. Here we go, back to the scientific approach. So you see how similar these books are in their approach. Freestyle wrestling is an application of human dynamics. It's therefore necessary for a wrestler to consider his opponent as an object, not as a living body, and observe it from various angles. When viewed dynamically, every object has a center of gravity, a point where the weight of an object is balanced. Okay? So he talks about that, and we saw that in the other book, Center of Gravity. Okay? Let's move on to the training. Talks a little bit about the training here. A wrestling coach should not let them undergo hard training or participate in a bout, this with really young, but train them with emphasis on building up fundamental physical strength necessary for wrestling. So it starts at a young age. It says here, a full-scale training of wrestling during a period from childhood up to the age of around 15 will be too hard for those in the age bracket and very harmful to natural development. So it says, accordingly, in Japan, boys usually start learning wrestling after they enter a senior high school, 15 to 16 years of age. And I know it's a little bit younger these days. Like it says, kids do start younger, but this is a little bit earlier. But again, the importance is building up the whole body. What he's saying is basically making sure that by the time you're 15, you have a very strong body all around, no holes. And that's what we see a lot of times. We see a lot of people get very good at skills, but they don't necessarily have the physical what they actually need for the sport in terms of basic athleticism. So let's go on. A wrestler is required to strengthen particularly the following parts of his body in the following order: neck, number 1, neck; 2, arms; 3, waist; 4, muscles of abdomen; 5, chest; and 6, legs. Then it goes on to say, in any sport, an athlete must first of all endeavor to strengthen his legs, since they're the foundation of physical strength. In this respect, wrestling is no exception. However, it's not that wrestling attaches special importance to the legs, but that it calls for equal or even more strength in every part of the body. And then he says swimming is quite similar to wrestling too. Then he goes on to say, I am of the opinion that one's physical conditioning can be at its best only when one is in good condition both physiologically and mentally. So he's talking about the importance of mental conditioning. He says the mental conditioning is not less, or sometimes is more important than physical conditioning. So you see the emphasis they're putting on with the mind. Okay. Let's go on. It says, wrestling being an exercise of the whole body, you must strengthen every part of your body, and particularly place emphasis on the development of athletic ability of your body: agility, durability, stability, balance, flexibility, reflex movement, etc. This sounds also, I want to pause for a moment because this sounds so basic. It's like, oh, have a nice solid athletic foundation, be flexible, be coordinated. But you'd be surprised how many college level wrestlers I see that are not that coordinated. They're not that physically strong all across their body. They know a lot of skills. They know a lot of technique. They have a little bit of athleticism, but not a lot. And that's something that's got to change. We got to make sure we are athletic. We need to be, first and foremost, at a young age, we need to be creating Tarzans, kids who could do everything. And then over time, now they have the foundation, they're able to move on to wrestling. So now it goes on to show different exercises for wrestling. And I mean, if you see, these guys are bridging with the bar. Now, don't just do this on your own. These people have worked up to this, but these people are doing bridges with barbells in their hand. What else? Show some other things. They show these. I think this is pretty cool. They show squats where your opponent is on your back and you're up against the wall and you're squatting down. And then remember these from a young age. Scoop down here, scoop push-ups. Where you go? My dad used to call them Japanese push-ups. He actually worked for a Japanese company for 17 years. So we learned some Japanese and what they were doing there. They show all the different locks, including some locks that I'm telling you haven't. Some of these locks you haven't seen before. That finger grip down there, all the way in the end. Some of these things, like I said, these are some things that a lot of people just have no idea about. Training the arms and the hands. This guy's going into a squat from a sumo stance right here with his opponent on his back. These people are doing sit-ups. So again, a lot of it's basic exercises. But some of these things that you haven't seen before. Okay, so let me give another key point here. Fundamental principle of tackling. So he talks about, let us learn the fundamental principle of tackling by comparing the human body to a pole. The white line shown is the center of the pole, is the center line in case the pole is laid down. If you place your shoulder a little below the center line, you can raise the pole using little strength. In the case of the human body, the center comes right on the navel, and therefore you can lift your opponent most easily by tackling slightly below his navel. So if you look what they're doing, they're showing with the stick here how to lift a man. How many wrestlers, I wasn't very good at lifting people. A lot of wrestlers aren't very good at lifting. How many people are looking at the center of gravity in terms of the shoulder just below the navel and it pops up just like a board would? And that's how he shows it to people, using the board technique. And if you look over here, back to Tadaaki Hatta's book, same thing. There's the board. What is he? He's lifting the board. Where he's got the board, it's holding right here. It's below the center of gravity. You see right here. And like I said, it's all mathematics, physics, and biomechanics. There's force. You have a fulcrum, and where it goes, the different directions. You have all the arrows. So like I said, it's not just go through the motions. This is technical stuff. So let's put that over to the side. Like I said, so those books are incredibly, these books are very hard to find. I don't know if any of these are available. In fact, I paid a pretty penny for these books. I had to get these things shipped in from overseas. I think together they're worth over $130 I had to pay for them. But like I said, it's great. I don't know where you could find, you'd have to ask Coach Hatta himself where you could find his book. I don't know where you could find his book either. Like I said, this one was given to me, and Date said it was the best book on wrestling that he's ever seen, and it was endorsed by John Smith. So like I said, it all has its roots in judo and mind and body. I can't stress that enough. There's a lot of things they're doing physically. A lot of the things they're doing, like a lot of the techniques, very similar to ours, right? Their athlete development is similar to ours, but I think they take their time more when it comes to developing. And I noticed this with the Russians too, because I have Soviet books as well. I could do a series on Soviet wrestling too. But what I notice is they're spending much more time on developing the body and mind of the athlete before they just throw them into competition and before they just bombard them with skills. Like in America, we're so, you have to look at the animating spirit of the country sometimes to see like why we do the things we do. In America, we kind of have a mentality of, land of the free, home of the brave, and I want it all. I want to be an NCAA, I want to be a state champ, I want to be an NCAA champ, I want to be an Olympic champ, and I want to win this tournament, I want to win that tournament. We're thinking about immediate success all the time. And also our mentality is like more from like the Gable era, where it's like, do more, put in more time than our opponent, which is great, of course. Like the surest way to be successful is to be fanatical, right? I always said that the surest way to be successful is to get fanatical. So in America, if you're just pure hard work, put in more time than your opponent, you probably will pass most people. But at what cost? Is it the most efficient way of doing it? Is there a better way of doing it? Is there a faster way of doing it? And is there a way you could do it without getting hurt? And I know that's something that's very important. Like when I talk to different coaches from overseas, they're very much looking at injuries. Our wrestlers get hurt and get surgery all the time. There's almost no college wrestler, very few serious college level wrestlers who haven't had some kind of surgery or some kind of, injury throughout their career. And again, I'm sure that's true with other places too, but they're really looking at developing the athlete before. In America, it's like, we want to compete. We want to compete. The cream's going to rise to the top. Learn moves, skills, moves, skills, moves. So by the time a lot of these kids are 7 or 8, these guys are pretty crisp with their technique. But how is their overall body? Do they have basic mobility, basic stability, which the Japanese and the Russians are looking at? And I think we need to take a page from them. I mean, they could take a page from us. We could take a page from them. We tend to be more of like an individual culture in America, where it's like, okay, each coach is running their own thing. Other places like Japan, the way the Soviet system was. A lot of these are more collectivist countries, and I'm not making a comment on what's better or anything like that. You certainly need some kind of balance of both. But if your mentality is more, hey, we're going to peak for the right time, we're going to keep. If they're aiming for an Olympic championship and they're not you got to win a national championship there before winning the Olympics. But every year we're competing here for state championship, national championship, Olympic championship. And it's like, I want it all. I want it all. And you can't help but think, like, let's say a guy like Spencer Lee, who's, again, his body is ripped up. And I don't know how,
his Higuchi. I don't know how ripped up his body is. And I mean, was he going through Iowa practices all the time? Was he going through the Big Ten schedule? Was he going through the NCAAs? He probably was, again, I'm sure he was working very hard. It's not that he wasn't competing. It's not that he wasn't practicing. But was he doing all that training that Spencer Lee was? I'd probably assume not. I'd have to assume that guy's body was a lot more fresh or overall injury-free, which means also probably lost a lot less time. So, yeah, we're certainly not putting down Spencer Lee or any of our guys. Obviously, they're great. And like I said, the surest way to be successful is to be fanatical and go all in and, hey, but more time, and just, run yourself down. But again, at what expense? Some people quit. A lot of people quit. Probably, most people quit. A lot of people get hurt. Probably most people get hurt. And what's the long-term ramifications of your body? Ask a lot of American wrestlers who competed and who are done with their career, especially like now, like people who are my age or below. And a lot of people, they can't wrestle anymore, or they can't run or sprint or jump the same way, bad shoulders, and can't do certain exercises. Why? Because, we ran our bodies down. And I think this more scientific, methodical, efficient approach is better. Like we have to find ways of working hard and smart. And so we have to learn what the Japanese are doing. We have to learn what the Russians are doing. And, again, these people are going freestyle all year round. And we're like, well, we want it all. We want to be champs in scholastic and freestyle. Great. I am more of that mentality. I'm born and bred in the American system and that mindset. So I'm thinking we want to do both. But if we're really looking at maximizing efficiency, it really doesn't make sense. If we're trying to win Olympic gold medals, you can't do everything. Okay, you can't do everything. You can't be, great at everything. I know we'd like to be, and I'm not saying there aren't people who can't do really well, but you don't see too many two-sport Olympians out there, do you? You don't see someone who's an Olympian in wrestling and they're also an Olympian in diving or swimming or track or one of the field events. You don't see it. They're specialists. Right? Okay, there's Deion Sanders out there, there's Bo Jacksons out there, but it's, like I said, it's the exception, it's not the rule. So how do we train harder and how do we train smarter? Like I said, you got to know the history, or you have to at least understand the history, that where they're coming from, and Kano with judo. So, we talk about this, and I know Yoshi Nakamura was being elected to the University of Pennsylvania Wrestling Hall of Fame. In October, September, we're real excited to go out there for that. He was great at judo. And why? He was connected with the Hattas and St. Ed's. And St. Ed's has that connection with the Hattas so they understand the Japanese school. So why are they really good? Well, that's a part of it's all part of the equation. So we have to be learning. The best people are learning from all different places. So I know there's a lot of wrestlers now who are doing judo. A lot of wrestlers now are doing gymnastics. Let's just not get so sucked into compete, moves, skills. Conditioning. Let's get the body prepared. And let's understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because everyone's training. Everyone's putting in hours. How do you jump ahead of someone who's training harder than you? You're going to have to do it more efficiently than them. There's no other way. And you're going to have that mental approach. You have to have that mental approach and making sure you're mastering your mindset, not getting overly attached to the outcomes, winning or losing. Development over time, playing the long game. The Japanese will play the long game. Other countries will play the long game. They will peak for when it matters the most, the Olympics. So if we want Olympic golds, that's what we got to do. If you like what you're seeing, make sure you like, subscribe. If there's anything else that I can include, any facts I got wrong, I'm not a historian on Japan. I read different parts of different books about, the history, the feudal age, the samurai. Yeah, I might have got some of these things wrong, but again, it's pretty accurate overall. Correct me if I'm wrong, and any information you have, please post it below. Like I said, these are great resources. These Japanese books. I don't know how many people are even aware they exist, and just how much they have in common. Like I said, that kazushi that they talk about, it's so basic in judo, so basic where they talk about it. Well, I don't really talk. I haven't heard any wrestling coaches really talk about that much. And yet, when I watched Yuri Shakamaradov's book, who was the coach of Russia, he talked about this, breaking opponents' balance. So this is, again, we're back to the other book, Sasahara's Wrestling. That's kazushi. Those are all the different ways you can move your opponent. It's the same thing as the judo book. So they're approaching it in a different way than we are as Americans, and we should really look at it like that too. It would pay to take some judo for a year or two, learn it, do some gymnastics for a year or two at a young age instead of compete, train. Get your whole body developed and have the right mental approach to all this. Whether it's wrestling, school, business, or life, mindset makes the difference. Make sure you're learning from everyone. Congratulations, Japanese wrestling. Congratulations to the Americans, too. We did a heck of a job ourselves. And they're learning from us, too. It's not just us learning from them. They're learning from us. And the same thing goes with the Russians. We learn a lot from them. They learn a lot from us. When you think you have all the answers, it means you need to start changing your questions. You have to approach sports and life with a white belt mentality. Mindset makes the difference. Have a great day.